Hello, welcome to the June 19th, 2026 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Hundo and I'm the host of the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can ask questions in the live chat field, or questions can be sent in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer all questions in real time may soon not be possible with the number of questions that come in. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, realize that we will go through all the questions in order as asked. So we don't need to repeat the same question over and over again. It just kind of slows down the whole process. So we should have an index of all of the topics that are covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field. With timestamps, so you could quickly navigate to the various topics. We should, and if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, I think we've passed 45,000 topics and over 2,000 hours. You could go to cubaseindex.com. We want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that site. It's a wonderful resource of information. We have two people that serve as moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. They're not Steinberg employees. They just do it to make it a better community experience, and we appreciate their efforts. And we will also give a special, extend our round of gratitude for Jazz Dude for the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So if you get a chance to check that out, where you can download links to tutorials and downloads and templates and presets. So a great resource for Steinberg users. So once again, my name is Greg Hundo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States. In Alexandria, Virginia. And if you are watching live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. With that, we will go ahead and begin. All right, so we see Michael Marshall just sending greetings from Somerset in the UK. Tim Zeist joining early. His cat buddy is waving a paw. Hello to my cat Steven. Mark Raven's dog Stella and other pets nearby, and he's ready to learn. We see Staffan joining from Sweden. All right, so we have Bo from Canada. Says he has his question ready. All right, hopefully I can answer it for you. See Jazz Dude sharing a link to kind of 14 Cubase key commands. All right, so we see Ray Hank 45 just saying hello. Okay. Jazzy is also sharing a bookmark to link with Cubase keyboard shortcuts. All right. We have VS Terranova joining from a hot Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Okay, so we have Bo's question. It says, can you demonstrate how you would freestyle a melody without the metronome and then easily make the melody a standard 4/4 timing beat and project match? All right, so there's kind of like two different approaches to this. One is we could, just have, you could have the music follow the timing, the existing timing. So and often that would be handled through quantizing. Another method that we could use for this would be just to utilize, let's see if I have this. Would be to have the project timing based on the musical choice. So let's say I'm playing a melody here, and I'll just record it. All right, so let's Let me just take off the loop here. So we'll just do a couple of measures here. I'll take the loop off so that we don't erase our existing data. So all right, so say I just kind of played a melody. Now if we were to put the click track on, let's see, hopefully I didn't play too like the timing of, so let's say. So we can hear that there's no correlation between the click track and the melody that I just played. So let's say, okay, I want this melody maybe to start right at the beginning of the first note. And what I'm going to do is just go to my project menu, and we will go to tempo detection. So we're going to our project menu to tempo track, and we're going to do a quick tempo detection on the existing MIDI part. So we're going to say, okay, let's analyze. All right, so now when we play, all right, so once it's done that, it's now made a signature track, a tempo track. So if we open up our tempo track here, we'll see that we're going to have our tempo track laid out for us, and it's made a signature track. So let's say, okay, right where this starts, I want this to be in 4/4 time. So now as we want to come over here, now all of our notes, as you can see, are kind of lined up to the grid right here, because now what we've done is we told the computer to automatically use this timing as the basis. And it's, while I played it not horribly, with horrible inconsistent timing, we could just kind of come right over here and so, and at that point, now the grid is following the musical performance. And if we wanted to do that differently before we did the tempo tracking, I could just come over here and I could quantize. And that may not be like the most accurate representation because we're quantizing a performance to an existing grid. But when we do our tempo detection, and again, come over here to project and tempo track to tempo detection, and you could actually kind of listen to it. So let's say we do our analysis of it and we play. I could also just say multiply by 2. So that way you could listen to it, because sometimes it may do a tempo detection where it's half the speed. And we could say that we're roughly 122 to 131, just kind of the range, so maybe roughly 120 something. So now we can just simply have our MIDI on the grid like that. So let me know if that's helpful for you, BO. All right. All right, so we see it says second part to the question, it says, I find out when I make a melody freely when starting a new project and then try to make the project resemble the BPM of the created melody, Cubase shifts my melody and changes my original flow. So let me know, sometimes what can happen before you do a tempo detection. One of the tricks that I like to do, if you don't want the melody to be shifted, because generally MIDI will follow the tempo, if you lock the track here and then do your tempo detection, because what could happen if you have like an existing part, try locking the track, and then when we go to your project menu to tempo detection. And now that we've done our tempo detection, we could unlock the event. And let's say if I'll just do the double time on that, on the tempo detection, just so you can hear it. So analyze, multiply by 2. And then as we close our track down, and then you could do editing of the tempo track as needed around, but that should get you most of the way there. So let me know if that's helpful. But sometimes if you have MIDI and you have audio, I would choose to lock the MIDI so that the MIDI stays in its place before doing the tempo detection. All right, we see Tim Weinheimer on from Mission Viejo, California. We have Pastoral Apologetics checking in from Southern Texas. Thanks for being online with us. Great to see you on again. All right, we have Tony Trunzo joining from Australia. All right, so we see from Tim Weinheimer, in the project window when using the drum machine, it has a little drop-down window. How to do another pattern to it. Okay, so let's say if we come here to our drum machine. So let's say we'll come over here to our drum machine. All right. So let's say I do a quick pattern for the drum machine here. Okay, so let's say I've made a quick drum pattern here. Let me just get rid of my tempo. Okay. I'll just add a new one real quick for demonstration purposes. Okay, so let's say so how to get like two different patterns. All right, so let's say we are here. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the pattern editor. So let's say I just am programming a pattern. All right, so let's come over here, say, okay, let's. Don't see a cowbell for Beverly, but we'll come over and all right, so let's say I have one pattern here. Now the cool thing is I could actually just say let's duplicate this pattern and do, let's say, a variation. So let's come over here and do some more. And then I could duplicate this pattern again. And let's say, okay, now I want to throw in claps here. Then we could duplicate this pattern or start a brand new pattern. Say, okay, let's do all right, so now when I drag a pattern over to my project window, so let's say, okay, I drag this pattern here. So within this particular pattern, you know, we have 4 different patterns that we've created for this track. So I could say, okay, we want to start with pattern 1. We want to then progress to pattern 2, back to pattern 1, let's say to pattern 3 and pattern 4. So now when we play this back, so once we have the patterns for this particular track, we could drag those patterns or drag a pattern and just simply kind of switch between those. So if we just say, okay, let's just do a new pattern, we go right over here and we could now just make a brand new pattern. So even though we have the pattern editor for one track, this could contain, you know, lots of different patterns. So that way we could just say, let's come over here. And say that's my pattern for that. So that way you could work, you know, you don't have to think of it as one pattern per pattern editor. You could have, probably my guess would be 128 different patterns. I haven't tried to go up to 128, but that way you could just kind of easily do variations on your pattern to add more instruments for chorus or bridge or intro ending. Just kind of do variations easily. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Tim. All right, so Dallas LaRue says, how do I activate my Groove Agent, Distortion, RevX, Reverb series plugins if they don't show up in my activation manager? So make sure, you know, because you need to get the download, you need to get the code first to install. So check your vouchers. So if you have the hardware that's registered to your My Steinberg account, when you come over here, let's say we go to So if you have the hardware, it will probably show up. In a second. So look in your vouchers folder here and see if you have, make sure you'll probably see a voucher for the basic FX suite, and then that would give you a code. So and with that, so let's say, okay, you want to do this, you'd see like a code like this, copy that code, and at that point, go to your Steinberg download assistant, and what you'd want to do is just to paste that particular code into your download assistant, and then that will authorize it for you. So once you have that code that's visible, go to the Steinberg download assistant. So I realize that you may have it installed already, but you need to make sure that the license is kind of tied to your account. So go to the download assistant, and where it says redeem code, paste that code in, and then that should activate those particular plugins for your account. And again, those plugins come with the hardware. So, but if you just, and you can probably see more information, like if we go to, let's say, I'm just going to go to like the downloads area for, let's say, and you'll see the basic FX suite. So, so we can see it's no longer available for e-licenser. So, but you could read up more on it here for the release notes if you're running a Mac or PC, which will discuss kind of the licensing stuff for you. But make sure that check your vouchers. If you don't have a voucher, let me know. You could email me, and we could probably make sure that if you have the hardware registered, that the voucher could show up for you. All right. All right, we see John Costigan joining from Kenosha, Wisconsin, welcoming all Cubase users in the Earth Quadrant. John Mateda official says, which is the best compressor in Cubase 15 for lead vocal? You know, there's a number of great plugins available. The first one I would try is under Dynamics. If you come over here to the Vox comp, is kind of optimized for vocals. That may be my first one I would go to. You could also, I think that came in 14, but if we come over to Dynamics, Black Valve is also, a great compressor plugin. It's hard to go wrong also with when we go into the Ultra Shaper, is you could do some amazing things with that. But it could depend like exactly, what you need to do compression wise for a particular song, but those are kind of great choices to start with. And if you're just looking for overall vocal processing, always check out, if you go to the vocal category, check out the vocal chain, which will give you, like your cut filters, gates, pitch correction, de-essing, dynamic filters, you have character dynamics, EQ, dynamic filters again, as character or clean, your EQ, you have imager, and delay and reverb all within one single plugin. So that's pretty compelling as well. All right. All right, so we see Nacho Gonzalez Napa says recently switched from Logic to Cubase. I have a massive template and having issues with track visibility. I want to see only tracks with data and display it unfolded. Suggestions to build a Project Logical Editor preset. So let's say if I'll just open up one here where I have like a template with folders active in it. Okay, so I'll just come here. Let's say, okay, on this I want to have so let's come over here. Let's say we'll do a viola part. And let's add a French horn. And some xylophone here. Okay, so let's say I have these particular tracks. Let's say I have these in folders with group tracks. So let's see if I come over, let's see if we need to build a Project Logical Editor, or if we just come over here, we say show tracks with data. Okay, so let's see if we open. All right, so let me see if I open first. So let me go to track folding and we'll say unfold tracks and then show tracks with data. Let me come here. All right, so if we wanted to make that a macro, okay, so let me just hide the lower zone here. So we only want to see those particular tracks. So let's try just making a macro. So we go to your Cubase menu if you're on Mac OS. I assume you're on Mac OS if you switch from Logic, but if you are on PC, you go to under Edit menu, your key commands. So, and we will see like macros here once you open up the key commands. So we will make a macro. So we'll say, okay, show tracks with data. All right, so if I have all of the folders closed, so I'll just come over here and search for fold. So we will say like unfold tracks. Let me just. And we'll add the command, and then we'll go to visibility. Let me just get the exact name of it here. So we'll say. So I'll just do show tracks with data. So I'm going to search based on that name. Probably shouldn't be a macro, but let me. Okay, so under tracks, so we'll say show channels tracks with data. So we're going to add that command. So under channel and track visibility. All right, so now when I come over here, we have all these tracks and a lot of them are blank. If we run the macro, I can now just see the tracks just laid out for me like there. So since they're being routed to groups, I could also probably, let's say we want to let's see if we can hide the group channels if you don't want to see the group channels. Let's see if we add that command. Okay, so I'm going to show all tracks. So yeah. So let me know if you need the group channels hidden, but we can kind of come right over here, and it could be that these are routed to folder with group tracks, but of all of our tracks here, I could just run that macro and see and hide the empty tracks. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Welcome to the Steinberg family. We hope to see you on many more live streams. All right, we see Rick from Bratman Studio. Says it's overcast in Whittier, California. Says having a problem with Cubase 15, so reset preferences and cleaning up problems. Maybe talk about that and best ways to see if there's. So if you need to reset preferences, occasionally we will see situations. Not sure if I see the second part. So if you want to know how to restore, like reset preferences, what you could do is come right over here. So I'm going to just do this on Cubase 14. We'll show you how. So if you're on Mac OS, you want to hold down Command, Option, Shift. On Windows, you want to hold down Alt, Control, Shift right after starting the program. So I'm going to start the program, hold those keys down. And as we come over here, we have the option to start in safe mode where we could disable the program preferences, deactivate third-party plugins, or we could choose to delete the program preferences. So that would be like starting in Cubase for the first time if you choose delete program preferences. So that's how you do it. So again, on Mac OS, start the program, and immediately after starting, hold down Command, Option, Shift. On Windows, Alt, Control, Shift. All right. We see Roland Steff joining from Sussex, England. We have Brian Sawyer joining from Yuma, Arizona. Just quit Cubase 14 here. All right. We see Soren joining from Sweden. All right, so we see from Bo, just says, Greg, I love you, man. No joke. Thank you. So glad it was helpful. We're here to answer as many questions as you have. All right, great to see Beverly joining from Vancouver. All right, so we have Ray Hank 45 asks, I have a question. How do I add a shortcut to open the key editor? It would save a lot of time for me. So if you want, you could just hit it's usually Command or Control E for the selected event. Now you can have a preference so that if you go to, let's say, your preferences or settings, and we go to editors, we can say your default. By default, the default MIDI editor is the key editor. If this is set to, let's say, our score editor, I could come over here, and when let's say I'm in my mixer and I hit Command E on that event, that would take me into the score editor or the list editor. So, but generally, Command E will take you directly into the key editor by default. That default editor could be changed under preferences or settings to editors. And then, so try Control E or Command E, depending on your operating system. And if you wanted to open up the event, like maybe not in the lower zone, but in a full key editor, we could see, just not from the preferences, but let's go to our key commands. And I think there's a separate command that you could, under editors, that you could open a key editor in the lower zone or open a key editor in a separate window. So if you go to editors, so usually MIDI will default to just being the key editor when you hit Control or Command E, and that will go into the lower zone, but you could change that to have a separate key command that goes into the lower zone, into the key editor itself, or into a separate window. So if you never want to use a lower zone because you have a dedicated screen for MIDI editing, you could do that as well. All right, Tony Trunzo from Australia asks, Greg, can you please explain what resolve display conflicts in the score editor track is? Thanks. All right. Okay, so let's say this is my project and I have lots of chords, and let's say in this example I have chords that are changing every 4 beats in 4/4 time, so basically 1 chord per bar. But let's say, okay, I come here and I have, okay, so let's say, okay, I want to take this and I want this to be a G major chord, and let's say, okay, I want to go A. Let's go to a B chord. Let's go to C to C sharp. So we'll have kind of more density in our chords here. So sometimes now when we do this, let's say I'll do an A with a C sharp and a bass. Okay, so, and you'll see this little option for resolve display conflict. So now if I kind of zoom in, it could be hard to actually see what the chords are, but when we click on resolve display conflicts, it could kind of stack the chords so that they're more easily visible. So with that turned off, it could be hard to see at this magnification of the zoom factor what the actual chords are there. Is that a B or an E? But when we do this, it'll kind of stack the chords so that they're more legible at the various zoom levels. So that's what that resolve display conflict display does for you. All right, so you see Jazz Dude just mentioning, says about using polyrhythms, and it says the pattern tools, it says he added different lanes to adjust synth filters, resonance, and I'm not sure if it's limited. How many can we add? So if you're not familiar with this, let's say, okay, I have a synth bass part here. So I'll just start from scratch and I'll convert this. I'll just add an instrument here, and we're going to make this into a pattern event. All right, so I'm going to come over, and one of the cool things that you can do in a pattern event is it's not going to be limited to just actual notes. So when I come over here, we'll say, okay, let's make it a melodic pattern, and I'll just kind of start from scratch here. So let's say, okay, we're going to set our key to, let's say, D major. Okay, so we have our key set. So I want to just put in different rhythmic patterns. All right, so let's say we play this pattern here. All right, now we have like different functions here at the bottom. So we can say, okay, let's go ahead and, if we want to adjust the probability of notes, we can say, okay, this note's going to play back 40% of the time. So as we play this, now we could assign these functions to other functions, like, where we can say, okay, I want to adjust the gate, velocity variance, probability, offset, repeats, my velocity, but we could add other parameters. So and we could do this a couple different ways. One is just to go to the plugin itself. Let's come over here to the cutoff and say pattern editor, assign step automation filter cutoff. Okay, so now I've done that, and now we can say, okay, our filter cutoff. All right, so now let's go ahead and say we want to put this on, let's say, our master volume of the plugin. So I could now come over and we could make these notes softer. So as we play. And so we could just keep adding different particulars. So let's randomize the pitch. So we come over here. Okay, so let's come over here to our volume. Let's go to randomizing the pitch. So we could select this and control that parameter. So we'll just keep adding more fine control. Let's see how many we can add. My guess would maybe be 127 or 128. So every parameter that's available for that instrument to automate, we can just come over here and just add multiple parameters. So I'm not sure what I could try to get the exact number, but my guess would be it'd be 128 different options that you could also automate in the pattern mode of programming as well. All right, so we see from Tim Weinheimer says, thanks, Greg. That is great. Perfect. I love how Groove Agent works with the drum machine. Yeah. All right, so we see from Dallas LaRue, just as it's not in his voucher. So if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I can pass it on to support. And if you have like the model number, check to see if you have the model number for your audio interface and maybe the serial number. If you have that information, like maybe take a picture. If you want to email me, I'll be happy to pass it on to support for you, Dallas. Okay, so we see Tim Weinheimer has a question. Could you show me how to put compression on the kick drum only in Groove Agent? Thanks. Okay, just cleared my throat, sorry. All right. Okay, so let's say if we want to go to like Beat Agent, so I will come over here. So let's say we have a pattern. Okay, so I'm just going to select this, and when we go to our mixer, all right, so all of my drums, my kick is coming out of bus 1 here. So let's say if I have my snare going. So if we just take the solo off of everything, these are kind of split to their different tracks. So now I solo my bass drum. I come over here. And then if we go to, if you click on the effects button here, so just click on the effects button, and then we could say, let's come over and say dynamics. So I want to put, let's say, just the compressor on. And that way it's not going to, so again, just once you have the mixer open, we'll come over, so let's say I'll solo that. So if I hear that in context, and if we wanted to, do makeup gain as well. Now, if we were doing a acoustic agent kit, it might be handled slightly differently. So let's take a look at that. So let's come over to our acoustic agent. So again, come over here to the mixer. We go to our kicks. It's very identical here. So, and you could just say, okay, let's come over to your plugins and let's go to our auto gain compressor. So again, as soon as we just come right over here. So say, well, that way you could apply. So once you go to the mixer, and this mixer could be floating a separate window, you want to just kind of click on the effects tab here, and then you could place compression just on a kick drum or snare directly here. Just open up as plugins. So you have your plugins that come within Groove Agent. You have access to right there. In addition to, you could take it into your Cubase mixer and do stuff, or kind of have this a lot of plugin control directly from within the Groove Agent mixer. All right, Ray Hank says, what ASIO driver is the best? Cubase built-in or something like ASIO for all? So if your audio interface has an ASIO driver, use that. So on the Windows platform, you may see like, Steinberg ASIO driver, and that's if you're using maybe like the built-in audio hardware on your Windows, like a laptop, and you're not utilizing an audio interface, I would use that. ASIO for all was kind of like a previous attempt at that, but Steinberg came out with a new driver. And then if you have a Steinberg interface, some of the nomenclature may be a little confusing. So you may see like the Yamaha Steinberg USB driver, and that would be the driver that's specifically for Yamaha or Steinberg hardware. So I would tend to use the Steinberg, just a Steinberg ASIO driver over the ASIO for all. As Jazz Dude mentioned, just if you have the dedicated one for your audio interface, that's always the best choice. It says it uses, and we see Ray Hank just saying, I use my laptop headphone jack, the Realtek. So yeah, just use kind of the Steinberg ASIO driver. It may be a slightly different term, but you could use that if you're using like the headphone output. All right, so you see Henrik Horning says, when to use send and when to use insert effects. So we could think of, if we're doing, we'll just show an example of this. So insert effects are going to be dedicated for a particular channel or a group. Now, what we could do, so a lot of times, if you're going to be sharing the same effect, and we see this often with reverbs and delays, we probably want to use send effects. So this way we could send multiple tracks to one effect and vary the amount. So let's say I want to take all of my drums here, and I'm going to route these to an effect track. So I'm going to add an effect track to the selected tracks. So let's add a reverb. Okay, so once I do this, now I have one reverb return channel. I'm running one reverb. And what I could do is say, okay, we're going to go to our sends. And as we look at our sends here, I'll just select all of these and we just bring all of them. All right, so I'm going to bring all these down if I use the right modifier key. Okay, so now when I'm playing my drums, for instance, I have one effect, but I could send to different amounts into that effect. So we'll have our drums come in here. So I could take my kick. All right, so maybe I could blend in, so I'm sending to that effects channel track, to this track here. So maybe I want more reverb, but it's one effect, and we could send different levels of that effect to that channel. Now this also goes out parallel. So if I want to come over here and add a delay, so let's say, okay, now I want to come over here. Let's add an effect to all these tracks. I'll add another effect. So let's say select these tracks. We'll add a delay. So we added to it. What we're doing is basically doing the routing. So now I'm going to have a delay to all the channels. Okay. So let's say I want to take my snare track here and we can hear the snare going through the delay. Now, what's great about this is when we're sending out a send, and if we look at our channel, insert effects are going to be in serial, whereas send effects are going to be parallel. So if I had a reverb followed by a delay, followed by a compressor, followed by an EQ, my reverb gets delayed, gets compressed, and gets EQ'd. So it kind of goes straight in order. So all of those processings are applied to it. Where when using a send effect, what I'm doing is sending these in parallel. So my reverb doesn't go through the studio delay. My delay doesn't have, I'm not delaying reverb. This audio is going out to directly to the reverb, and it's also in parallel going out independently to the delay, so the reverb isn't delayed. So if I wanted to if we take our snare drum here, so let's take our snare top and let's open this up. So right now I have, and when we listen to it, so, and let me just, so we do this, I will come over and so these are all bleeding. So my delay is going on. But my delay isn't going to be a reverb delay. But if I come over here and put the reverb going into the delay as sends, again, this is serial, so all the processing goes in order. We can now come over, let's add our delay. We'll hear that all of the reverbs will now be delayed as it's playing. So I'm not just getting the reverb, the delay. It's delaying the reverb as well. So these are going in serial, so all the processing is kind of cumulative, whereas all the processing is parallel here and going down independent audio paths. So so often like compressors, EQs, good rule of thumb, those are going to be specific for a particular instrument, run as inserts. Effects are going to be shared, reverb, delay, maybe coursing or flanging. Effects are going to be shared across multiple channels. You could use as sends and blend the amount in. So let me know if that's helpful. So I see some people will, they want reverb in all their drums, and they'll run 8 reverbs as inserts, and you're running often 8 of the same plugins, using 800% of your audio processing, as opposed to sending it to one single instance of the reverb. That takes less audio performance from your computer. All right, so we see from Ray Hank says, I tried to Cubase built-in ASIO and got like 10% less performance. Make sure also that what could affect the audio performance is also the latency and the buffer size. So make sure that you have matched buffer sizes when you're doing that. All right, so my chat field jumped. All right, so we see from Dallas LaRue says, maybe I need to register my UR22C. I've had it for over a year but never registered it. So yeah, registering it will definitely help. So if you have that option. All right, so you see Greg about the Groove Agent being compatible with the right side zone. I've asked last session, I meant if we could hot swap fast without opening the browser in Groove Agent, it'd be so much better. Like the browser in Groove Agent already allows you to kind of hot swap. But I'll just take a look just to see if we could do it. Thanks for the clarification. Sorry for my misunderstanding. All right, so let's say if I'll just create a quick pattern here. All right, so say if I just play. All right. All right, let me just see if Okay, so let's say yeah, so I think one of the things that you can do here is, let's say, okay, I want to take, I have this pattern playing. If you're looking for, let's say, if you go through, I'm looking for snares here, and I could just say, while it's playing. So, it seems like I don't know if there's much of a difference between doing kind of your hot swapping here versus the right zone pattern editor. I'll mention that to them, but, it seems like it's very similar functionality to me. But if it's different for you, just let me know how. All right, wonderful to see Terry Gray checking in from Minneapolis area. Thanks for sharing that mic preamp post. It was great to watch, Terry. So, all right, so we have Jabulin Malangu 63 says always attend the live stream. Thanks for popping in, saying hello. All right, so we see Rob Schmedeke checking in from Tarpon Springs, Florida. Okay, so you see, hi Greg, could you please explain prepare archive option when you have audio files in another folder? When I click on it and then close the project, the files are still in the wrong folders. I get a message, it is ready to archive, but the files don't move. Okay, so let's do just a quick test here. Okay, so we'll do a new project. Okay, and I'll be careful, so let's say our new project, we'll create an empty project. I'm going to put this into, let's say, okay, so we'll say our Hangouts folder, and we'll make a new folder, and we'll call it Archive. Okay, so now when I go to record an audio file here, and we look at our project setup by hitting Shift plus the letter S, we can see, okay, we haven't saved projects. I'm going to just save this as archive test. Okay, so now we hit Shift S. We can see that our project location is going to be in Hangouts, archive test, CPR. So, okay, so I'm going to record an audio folder here. So we'll say this is going to be at the project folder level. Okay, so now when I come over, I hit record. Okay, so now we come over here. Let's show the project folder. So now we have an audio folder here. That's the project folder. So we have the name. So that's where our audio is. And so within this particular, our archive test, it places it into the audio folder automatically. We could also see this reflected in the pool window. So when we come over here, we could see our audio file and we look at the path. Okay, so it's going to be in Hangouts, archive folder, media, audio. Okay, so I'm going to record a new audio file. So we're going to add an audio track and we'll call this outside of the project folder. Okay, and I'm going to right click and we're going to just say, okay, we want to set a different record folder. So I'm going to do my record folder here, and I'm going to put this into my documents. All right. Okay, so now I record this audio file. Okay, so this is outside of the project folder. I go to my pool. My pool will reference both audio files, even if they are in different folders. So this is in the documents, archive test. This is in projects, Hangouts. All right, so now these are in different folders. When I save my project here and we open it up, those two files would play back as expected. So let's close this project. Even though those files are in different folders, we go and we will reopen that project. We'll activate it. So again, we confirm that the location for the two files are in different locations. So let's say now I want to consolidate these, and when we consolidate it, it puts it into the project audio file. So I will go to my media. Let's choose to prepare archive. It says external files will be copied, and this is the main word here, copied, not moved, but copied. So I'm going to say proceed. It said pool is ready for archive. Okay, so I go to my pool window. We see that both of the files are now into the project, into the same project folder. But when we go to look at in my documents folder, that file is still there. So we get the documents and we come over to the archive test. So it should be, yeah, so here we'll see this. So here is the file. The file is still here. So what the prepare archive does is it actually just copies that file directly from its location into the project folder. So it didn't move it. It didn't erase it. It's kind of a two-step process in case you need to go back for some reason. The original file will still be there. So again, it's copying the file, not moving the file. So when we go into this particular folder again, so let's get to, we'll see that within the project file where we had just one particular audio track, when we come here, we now have outside a folder and the project folder. So we can see that that file has been copied into the project folder through the prepare archive function. So let me know if that makes sense for you, Rob. Great to see you on the live stream. All right, so we see Jazz Dude has my Project Logical Editor and MIDI Logical Editor presets that are free to download in the Discord. All right, so we see Bratman Studio says, "Hey Greg, I'm playing with Very Audio. I need a little help. What is shift format?" So it's probably shift formant, and formants are just kind of like the series of overtones that you have that are kind of particular and identifiable for different voices. So let's say if I'm and one of the things that we could do is, like, if you're doing a big pitch correction, you may have to adjust kind of the formant to make it sound kind of more in character. Kind of like, the famous chipmunks, how the character of their voices change when they sped the tape up. So let's come over here and we'll go to, let's say we'll just get our basis for...
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago.
All right, so let's say we have that. So I'm going to come in here into the Very Audio editor, and we'll say, and we're just going to do our Very Audio editing. All right, so I'm going to select I'm going to switch this to to show all of the smart controls. And when we come over here, we could say, let's shift the formant. So listen to it again.
Do you recall the day we first met?
Like to the character of the voice, like we know it's a male singer, sounds like.
Ago.
All right, so now if I want to adjust the formant on all of these tracks, so I'll just go to like an extreme amount.
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago.
So let's go over here. Let's shift the formant down. So like if you pitch something up, like you're creating harmonies, and then it started sounding a little artificial.
Do you recall the day we first...
You could adjust the formants to change kind of the characteristics of the voice. So sometimes...
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago.
And I've seen it in sessions where, maybe it's a singer that's maybe in, their 20th year of their career, and they can't quite have this same tonality as when they were younger, and they don't can't hit the high notes as much, and the character of their voices change. That engineers will kind of adjust the formant to kind of change the character of the voice to make it sound a little younger or older. So that's what the formants do within Very Audio. All right, so we have Henrik Horning just saying hi from the Netherlands. Thanks for joining us. We have Chulum Nair joining from California. Great to see you on again. All right, so we see from Beverly Beatty, says, Greg, when using the Scale Assistant, can you colorize the background of the correct notes that are true scale rather than the gray tones shown by default? All right, so if you're not familiar with this, let's say I'm going to do just a quick make a chord track here from the guitar part that we're just listening to. And when we come over, let's go to our piano part here, and we could choose to color. So currently we have this piano part that is colorized based on the velocity. So if I increase the velocity, we see that these notes turn red. But this is just kind of a nice little atmospheric piano part.
Well, even now I'm so in love with you.
All right, so let's say we know what, we're going to come over here to the scale assistant. We could choose to use the chord track. So the chord track is assigned to scale. I believe it's, take a quick look at it. So we'll come here to our chord track. And as we look at the beginning of the chord track, it's assigned it into A major. So let's say we want to change the colors so that we could see the colors based on the scale and chords. So if we come over here, let's say I move this note, and I'm going to turn off, let's say as I move this particular note, we can see that we have a red note. So red notes are kind of probably not the best sounding harmonically for this. So I could look at this, and when we have the colors based on scales and chords, we can see that I have notes that, like if they are red in color, that would indicate that it's out of the key and out of the chord. So, but we could actually kind of see what the legend is when we select scales and chords. If we go to our setup, we can say that, red is, this pitch is not in a current chord or current scale. So we can say that these notes that are kind of like a more demure, like a softer green, these notes are within the scale. And then we could also say that these notes are in the chord, and that these notes are in the chord and scale. So sometimes you may have a chord. So let's say we are in A major, and let's say I'm doing this B minor chord. And if I select this B minor chord with a, let's say with a G in the bass. So now if I move a note here to G, that we could have kind of, different colors on if it's in the chord. So if you want to change the particular colors, you could just click here to change what the particular colors of the notes are in relation to kind of the musical relationship. So after a while, if you're using your scales like this and you're following the chord track, you could say, this is a bad note, this is a good note, this is a better note. So, but like in most international countries, red is stop, green is good, go. Just like most traffic lights in countries I've been to. That same premise carries over for the coloring within the particular scales as well for here. So. All right. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Beverly. All right, so we see Soren just says, I need to watch 1 hour of AI seminars. A Swedish organization, STIM, royalty collectors have started optional licensing Swedish music to AI training. One will get paid if training or use. You'll be back. All right, tell us what you learn. All right, so we see from TrackQuest Music, hi G, I got a new Novation Launch Key 49, and I only want to keep the play, record, stop, loop, etc. on the right of the MIDI keyboard. I want to keep the same script, but edit it. Thank you. All right, so if it is a MIDI remote script, so let's say I have one set up here for my Korg Nano control that I'm utilizing here. So, but let's say if we're on a particular, if you wanted to edit the script, all you'd have to do is double click on the parameter, and then, we could see, okay, I want to click on this button, and then you have a scale assistant. So if you click right over here, then that particular function can be remapped to, thousands of parameters inside of Cubase. So you could remap. And if you're here, you could also just say, okay, I want to keep that set up. I want to have the same knobs, and maybe I want this controller to function differently in the score editor or differently in the MIDI editor or when I'm tracking or mixing. We could add a MIDI remote page. So we can say, okay, this is tracking. So I'm going to come over here. So once I have kind of the page layout with all the knobs, the physical controls, I can come over here. Let's add a tracking, and now this gives me kind of a blank template, and I could just customize this for however I want. And then when I go back to mixing, I could switch to my mixing template directly here. So you could just take one particular script if you're doing it in the MIDI remote, and you could just double click and assign. You could also, if you go to the upper right hand corner, you'll see an icon here for the MIDI remote mapping. If it is being utilized as a generic remote, most of it, is going to be done in the MIDI remote script here. But if you want to go to your studio setup, you could, if it's configured through generic remote, you can come over here and remap all of the buttons directly here. So if you just click on learn and then hit the button, then you could reprogram the function right there. So that will pop up. So this is the incoming MIDI message. This is the MIDI message function that you're doing right there. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Congratulations on your new controller. All right, so we see John Mateta official just says thank you for your answers. All right, Tim Weinheimer just says, always learn cool things I didn't know Cubase could do. All right, Chiluminaire says, hi, if my song is already hitting the target LUFS -14 or louder, why does it still sound quieter than songs on YouTube and TikTok? What adjustments I need in Cubase? How can WaveLab help? So it could be that, like each service may have different optimum like LUFS levels. So I know, like I was talking with one of the guys who works with Zed, and he was telling me it's like, oh, for YouTube it's this, it's this, I do like -13.7 LUFS, and that's perfect. But on Amazon Music, it's this value. On Apple Music, it's this value. So it could often be, sometimes some people will manipulate and know how to manipulate the values. You could try to see what it's doing. Also, make sure that you're doing a direct A/B comparison. It's really easy to play your track versus a track that's on a streaming service. And if you're playing it from Cubase, it's not really kind of an apples to apples comparison. So there could be a lot. And there's, an art to mixing. If everyone, like a mix, sometimes a mix may sound louder, but meter out to be the same thing. And it's just because of the quality of the mix as well. So, there's a reason that, some people I know get $30,000 a day to mix a track because they don't have those issues, and they kind of know how to, do the mix correctly, and it could be part of the arrangement. How the songs are arranged musically can also have a big difference. But make sure that you could try to increase, your values. It may affect your dynamic range, but make sure you're doing a straight, a straight comparison. So like that yours is streaming from the same site. And sometimes you may go, oh, Steely Dan records don't sound as loud as a more contemporary mix, but people still like the Steely Dan one better, maybe. So. All right, so John Works just says, "Hi, Greg. This is John from the Atlanta area. With the growing influence of the addition of AI tools in production workspace, can you share any thoughts on integrating AI functionality into Cubase? We have stuff already. So if you're working, and it could really depend on, what your definition of AI is. So there's a lot of people doing it inside of Cubase already. So if we want to look at, like one of the tools that you get with Cubase 15, let me clear my throat real quick, is going to be like OmniVocal. So when we come over to, OmniVocal, this is a virtual singer that you could just literally type in your lyrics. So if you're here, you could say, okay, I just want to take, this particular song and... So, you could, just be able to incorporate that. We could say that, the functionality of the chord track is artificial intelligence with chord suggestions. Being able to generate harmony voices automatically for you could be considered, artificial intelligence. Being able to, take MIDI input and have it map a chord track where the chord track was derived from an audio recording is, two other examples of artificial intelligence. So obviously, Steinberg is a cutting edge and bleeding edge company. We don't necessarily market everything as AI solutions for this, AI solutions for that, because we realize that there is a certain amount of humanity in actual creation. But, we don't want to deny that, those, workflows are existing, and, we did it with Virtual Guitarist and the original Groove Agent 20 some years ago, where that was, what a lot of people would consider AI functionality. There's a new Steinberg survey was released, I think, this month or last month, which, is a questionnaire where, and a lot of the questions are what the customers want to do and see AI being implemented into Cubase, and other Steinberg solutions. We also see a lot of functionality for AI within spectral layers for doing vocal removal from songs and stem separation. And we see that in Cubase as well. Okay, so you see Beverly Beatty says, I didn't know a mixer was right under Groove Agent. So yeah, all sorts of great stuff. And that way you could, have a Groove Agent preset with all of those, with all of the effects and dynamics and EQs set without having the ability to, have all of those settings stored only within a project. So. All right, so Chiluminaire says, hi, my mixes tend to feel narrow and center heavy beyond simple left-right panning. What techniques create a wider stereo image and deeper soundstage? Can Wavelab help diagnose better than Cubase? I mean, it could be hard to give a answer that could be applicable, without hearing an example. So there's a lot of times when, people will put, there's a lot of tricks that people do. Sometimes you may have stuff kind of panned hard left, hard right, but think of, and sometimes you'll have kind of, midway between left and right channels, between center and left and center and right. So if you think about it, maybe like a 5-point panning position where you have left, right, right, center, left, center, and center. Instrumentation can make a big difference. Like in the 80s, when people tended to use a lot more reverbs in their production. So let's say if you're, a very common trick in the 80s was doing stuff where, If there was two guitarists in the band, one guitar would be panned in each speaker, but the reverb for that guitar was panned in the other channel. So a lot of arrangement stuff, there's a lot of great songs that sound great because the arrangements are great. And, like the bass player and keyboard player aren't playing in the same range, and a guitar player doesn't have you have your two guitar players are playing the same chord, but maybe different voicings. So there's a lot of musical solutions for mixing problems that people often overlook. So if you have the ability, if you're involved in the creation process of the music, look there as well. But if you want to share a link, I'd be happy to take a listen to some of your mixes and see if there's any insights that I might be able to provide. And you can send that to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so we see BK Hawaii. It says, "Hi Greg, can I get a drum pattern in Cubase or Groove Agent by tapping out a rhythm on my MIDI keyboard or drum pad?" So let's say if you want to come over here, let's just... So we'll just open this up and think that we could, so let's get to like a pattern pad here. I'll just get rid of one. All right. So when you come over here, we could just record. So let's say, okay, we're playing, and let's put our metronome on. Okay. And let me just make sure I don't have this muted. Okay. See if we can get our metronome, but you could just kind of come over here. So you could just kind of sequence kind of directly inside right there. So if you want to, just record from the pads, if you could record it directly into Groove Agent, or you could just, trigger your MIDI notes and be able to trigger those MIDI notes and record it directly here. So let's say if I want to do like a one measure pattern, I can put this into like a MIDI record. So let's say, let me just mute that. So, if I have my drum pad, I can just, come right over here and say, okay, as we hit record. So, you could just program directly inside a Groove Agent or inside of the event from your drum pad or MIDI keyboard. And we see, or if I play melody, can Cubase or Groove Agent find a drum patterns that fit? So it's not going to automatically play a melody. If you, just like we showed earlier in the live stream, if we do a tempo map for a melody, then Groove Agent will follow the tempo. So what we would do, need to do a tempo detection, but it's not going to automatically suggest like the same, like 4 drum patterns for this criteria and the 3 drum patterns for this. I think it's easy enough to just kind of, if you have a pattern that you could just try out different ideas. So let's say, okay, I want to mute this event and I want to try different patterns, that I could just come over here and be able to audition different patterns with different kits. So if I want to come over here, but it's not going to automatically, listen to something and put a beat to it, but it's so easy. You have thousands of beats as presets in Groove Agent or the drum machine that will work and do it pretty easily for you. All right, Doctorius J asks, hello, just checking back to see if you found a way to see live chords when you're playing. Appreciate the channel. Yeah, so if we go to like the MIDI inserts, so let's say if I come here to, I have this Rhodes part, and we go to, let's say there's just one of the plugins has this kind of built in. So if we come over to the context gate plugin, you can just see the particular chords as we play. So you can see the chord display right there. So if it's something that's very critical for you, you could just open up that plugin and tuck it off to the side here and see the chords as you play in. So that's one way of doing it. Good to see you back. Thanks for joining us again, being part of the community. John Mateta Official asks, which is the best Windows to use Cubase 15 Pro? Is it 10 or 11? So I'm running 11 at home. I don't have any issues. I think Jazz Dude has a lot of work, a lot of tips in the Discord of optimizing, how to sometimes maybe de-bloat your Windows 11 or Windows 10 machine. There could be more stuff that's kind of open in the background. It's not necessary and doesn't enhance the music production. I think both of the machines work really well. I think the new MIDI functionality in Windows 11, I think, is really exciting as well. So that's something that, could be like a really interesting aspect of it that's not available. But, I tend to use, I'm a proponent of, I will use the operating system that came with my computer as long as I can. So sometimes the operating systems, like I see it on my Mac side where it's like, oh, you got new emojis, it's like, that's not going to have any impact. So I'll tend to use the operating system that comes with my computer as long as I can. Okay. Sorry, my chat field just jumped. All right, so we see Daryl Johnson says, was adding omni-vocal tracks to an existing audio choir vocal tracks. When I created the notes in omni-vocals, it automatically coupled with my existing audio tracks. How do I separate them? Okay, so it was adding... All right. So I haven't come across it, let's say, if I come back over here, so say I go to my omnivocal, so you're adding it to an existing choir vocal tracks. When I create the notes in omnivocal, is it automatically coupled with my existing audio tracks? So I'm not sure if maybe did you link these two? So like maybe I'm not sure if maybe like let's say if this was an audio file and this was the omnivocal where you just come over here and if you hit maybe Control G, if like when you move the events, are they like tied together kind of like that where you say, okay, I move one event, the other one is moving? If that's the case, and generally, using omnivocal doesn't turn that on automatically, but if you hit Control or Command G, that could group the channels, group the events, and then I think it's, so now I do that, and if I hit Command or Control U, we could ungroup the events, and then they are separated. If both of the events are selected, they will move like that. And then it's just a matter of selecting only a single event. If when you select one event, the other is selected, that would lead me to think that they are grouped, or, so, and then if that's the case, Control U, if it is where these two are in a folder together. So let's say if I come over here and these are placed into a folder, so I'm not sure if, like, as you do this, if, let me just show. So if they're in a folder, and you move, and let's say if the folder has group editing, that if you move one, like, it might move the other. So, but let me know if that kind of makes sense to check, just to see if, you move one and the other one moves automatically. It could be just grouped, and that's Control or Command G to group, and Control or Command U to ungroup the edits. All right, wonderful to see Gareth on, checking in from Bilbao, Spain. He wants everyone to insert the like button. Hope you're doing well, Gareth. All right, so we have Beverly just says, great explanation of the effects processing, Greg. Cheers. You're welcome. Hope that was helpful. All right. All right, so we see Milton X just says, hello, everyone. It's late, so thanks for joining us. And we see Tiago joining from Brazil. All right, Gary Strauss says, hi, Greg. I'm using two identical controllers of Cubase 15. When I rename them in the MIDI port setup, it doesn't remember the renamed controller when I turn it off. Any suggestions? So sometimes when you are doing that, I've seen some devices, and it could be the design of the MIDI driver by the company. So sometimes if you have two identical devices and they're both connected to your computer, at that point, like, the priority may be set to, it may be set to, which one is turned on first. I know I have two of the older Steinberg Mid-X8s, which are 8-in, 8-out MIDI interfaces. And when you go into the control panel, you could define, and this is a feature of the driver, you could define which one is Mid-X8-1, which one is Mid-X8-2, so that every time it boots up, like within the driver, it sees that this one is the first one, this one is the second one. So it's really a function of the MIDI driver and how that works as it's designed by the company. So sometimes if it's turned off or this one is seen first, then it may change the order when you turn off a device. So I would check with the manufacturer of the MIDI device, because I know when I have multiple MIDI devices that I define which one is like number one and number two. At least that's how Steinberg did it. I don't think I have other duplicate MIDI devices, but that way, my 16 ins, my 8-port MIDI interfaces aren't reversed every time I boot it up. So something you may want to look into with the controller manufacturer. All right, great to see. All right, so we see Lawrence from Barn Door recording in Rhode Island. All right, so we see DJ FK. SHG says Australia's gonna win. So yeah, I'm recording it. So no one share any World Cup information during the live stream. And it's gonna start in about 13 minutes. It's US versus Australia. So, but I think America looked the best it's looked in probably in forever in their first World Cup game in this series. All right, so we see Peter checking in from Winnipeg. All right, so we see Brian saying, "You're trying to say I'm old. I thought I couldn't hit the high notes because of too much coffee." Bass is more soothing, so. All right. So you see Beverly just says, yes, Greg, thank you, regarding colorizing notes in the scale. Cheers. Okay. All right, so we see Vince as Fly V joining from Winnipeg. Thanks for being online with us. All right, so you see Henrik Hording just says, do not need much AI. People are seriously working in music, need room for creativity, difference between McDonald's and a restaurant with Michelin stars. That's a good point. All right, so we see from Steve Green who asks, Greg, what does unmapped mean on startup of Cubase? I get this message pop up. So it generally means that you have a MIDI device or an audio device with a mapping. So let's say you're using a MIDI keyboard, like an external keyboard, and you have a track that's routed to that external MIDI keyboard. But let's say that MIDI keyboard isn't physically at the location. So when you get an unmapped MIDI message, and sometimes you may get it like when you open up a particular program or project, it's trying to say, okay, we don't have any way, we have a MIDI track. It's supposed to send MIDI information to this MIDI output port or to this audio output port. That MIDI port doesn't exist or isn't active in the operating system. Do you want us to use another MIDI port for that device so that we can send that MIDI information to the appropriate device so that your project plays back correctly? So when it comes up as unmapped, that could be a device that is no longer connected to your system that is still being referenced in the project file. So it's looking for a pathway. There's a pathway there, but the pathway doesn't have anywhere to go. And it's asking you, do you want to send it to a different MIDI, often to a different MIDI output, so that particular track can play back, and then you could save the remapping for future projects as well. All right, we see John Barry just checking in. Great to see you on. All right, John's question is, hi Greg, can I convert a MIDI event to a pattern melodic part or melody part? So currently we can go from a pattern event to a MIDI event, but sometimes the patterns can be, but there isn't a way currently that I know of to take a MIDI event and have it go directly into the pattern editor. So it's kind of a one-way conversion. So I'm not sure if there's like technical limitations or not, but I don't know of a way. I don't think it's possible currently. All right, so we see Chiluminaire just says thank you, so you're welcome. All right, so we see from DJFK just says 13 was cool. The LFOs, yeah. So I think all of the modulators came in version 14, if my memory serves correct. All right, so we see Millard Brown joining from now in Delaware. So let me know what part of Delaware you moved to, because my sister-in-law is moving kind of not too far from Rehoboth. She's doing it. She's probably in the middle of her move, wishing I was there hooking up her TVs and stuff today. But just out of curiosity, or if you're closer to Philadelphia, I think you're in Philadelphia area before. Okay. Slowly catching up here. All right, so Daryl Johnson says, Control U doesn't separate the omnivocal grouping from the audio. I'm unable to get into separate omnivocal channels to insert the words. I have the right notes, but they only sing ah. So let me know if you're trying to work, polyphonically with omnivocal. But like as we come over to, let's say if we have our omnivocal set up here, and if we don't have, so if you're trying to do, it's a monophonic instrument, just like all the virtual vocals, so you can't necessarily do a chord. But if I come over and say, okay, let's take this, and if I don't have words assigned to it, it'll probably say, ah. I'll just take off the loop. So, but, let me know. And if you have a screenshot that you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to take a quick look at it for you, Daryl. Yeah, but it says I have the right notes, but they only sing ah. But, again, if I come over here, like a lot of times when we're in MIDI, and I say, okay, I want to take, where we have how are you? How are you? So let's say if I come over here and I put two notes. How are you? It doesn't do, more, it's not polyphonic. It's just going to be monophonic. But if you want to, Daryl, send a picture of your screenshot to clubcubase@steinberg.de. I'd be happy to take a quick look at it. All right, so we see Michael Teams. I think it's just made his appearance. I think he's given Jazz Dude 1 gallon of amaretto chocolate ice cream. Great to see you on, Michael. All right, and we see that Michael has granted my family, myself, 1 gallon of fresh Texas apple pie ice cream. Sounds good. All right, so we see John Barry just says, Cheers, Greg. Thanks. Another question. What is pedal to note length? Thanks. All right. So let me see if I could create this. All right. So let me revert the project here real quick. Find my sustain pedal underneath my desk here. All right, so let's say I do a recording. My sustain pedal's behaving backwards now. All right, so let's say I have recorded sustain pedal information. So we go into, so we see our CC64, and let's say, all right, maybe I want these sustain to last where the notes are. So I think we come over here. So we'll say pedals to note length. That as we see, let's say if I draw, if I have pedal information in here, that now what we could do is all right, so let's say if maybe I have to select, so I think basically what it will do, let me just see if I need to select all of the pedals here. I think what it's designed to do is to match like your sustain pedal to the length of the notes. And so I think that's kind of the intention of it. So let me just see if I need to. I haven't done this in a long time, but I think that's kind of the idea, so that if you had to edit, that this would automatically, have the pedals aligned to the particular notes. Let me see if I have auto select controllers on. Okay, so let's say if I have that on, yeah, so I think that's what it's supposed to do, but I don't think I'm executing it correctly. So, but I think, like when you have sustain pedal, that pedal will kind of map and to the length of the note. I'll make a note to see if I get the workflow figured out for Tuesday's live stream. All right, so Henrik just saying, great job, Greg. Learned a lot today. So. All right, Miller Brown says he's now in Hockessin, the lovely town midst of mushroom country near Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. In the days you can smell the earthy scent and soil of the mushroom farms all around. Sounds great. So, yeah. All right, so you see Daryl Johnson says, thanks, he'll get the screenshot to me. Appreciate the try. All right. Hey, Greg, I made an alto track of a vocal, and now I'm trying to change some pitches. They will move but snap back to the original pitch. How to stay at the new location pitch? Thanks. Okay. So let's say on my lead vocal, I want to take this part, and this will be nonsensical musically, but I'll just generate a harmony part. We have some chord tracks above, so I'm going to go to my audio menu, and let's generate a harmony voice. Okay, so we'll do one harmony voice. All right, so we have that. So I go into Very Audio, and once we're in Very Audio here, we can say, all right, let's see if I have the chord track. All right. So once we're in Very Audio, I may go, okay, I want this pitch to, go up. And we may notice that it just snaps directly back to where we were. So I take this segment, I move it. So what we want to do is for that particular track, we'll go to chords, and we're going to choose voicings. So let's say if I set the voicings to off, so again, select the track, go to chords, and we'll set that to off, and now I can move that voice freely anywhere I want. So it's kind of following like harmonies, so that those harmonies are correct. But if you want to modify it, again, try selecting the track here, and voicings, set that to off, and see if that helps. All right, so we see Michael Teams has granted Rick 1 gallon of chocolate tuxedo ice cream. Right. See that Michael Team survived a heavy rainstorm last night. All right, so we see from Bratman Studios says, that's it. Thanks, Greg. Didn't know about that drop down feature. Yeah. All right, so let me see if I got Daryl's photo yet. See if it's come in. Bear with me just for a second. Yeah, I don't think I've gotten it here yet. All right. So we had a couple questions that were mailed in. So let me open up project. I had to kind of set up for that. Thanks for all the questions. Again, you could always mail questions into in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, let me go to my questions document. All right, so we had a question, how to easily automate volume increases in an audio loop of a recording of a modular synthesizer. This synthesizer does not respond to MIDI velocity, and I want to change the volume in distinct patterns. Okay, so let's say I'll just take we'll just take an audio recording here, All right, so let's say we want to make this a little more interesting, like sometimes how we would do it with like velocity on hi-hats, but let's say we have our velocity. We'll listen to just our part here. So we have this one note holding for 2 measures, and let's say every beat 3 I want the volume to increase, just like now we could draw in automation, but that's not really a lot of fun. It could be tedious. So if we want to kind of automate automation, this is when we could use controllers or the modulators. Okay, so this is, we could think of modulators as, you know, automating automation. So let's come over here to our step modulator. Okay, so what we could do is we want to adjust the volume of this particular, of the audio of this. I'm going to go to my inserts and let's use the volume plugin. So we will find this under tools. Okay, now I want to set my note here to be quarter notes, so that every one of these little values here is going to be a quarter note. And let's say I just want to do 4 of these. So I want to do, so how many steps we have, I'm going to say we're going to have 4 steps, and I'm going to put this into you know, my little with no slope. Now as we do this, what I want to do is to control the volume of beat 3. So I'm going to tell this modulator here to control the volume. Okay, so what we want to do is say, okay, we have beat 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to take beat 3 and raise the volume of that. So you can see that as we play. So I'll turn on my... And of course we could get like creative. So let's say, okay, we don't want it always so repeatable. I want 5 steps. So it's not every third, but every 3 of 5 in the pattern. And we could also say, okay, I want the second one to be lower. Or, you know, if we want to come over here, now let's say, okay, instead of quarter notes, I want this to be 1/8 notes. And let's go back to a more repeatable pattern here. Or every 3rd 16th note. And then we could also couple that with other parts here. So let's say I want to take the filter here. So let's put this in a loop. So we could add the same pattern to, let's say, my cutoff. And we could kind of increase so this way we could take kind of this same rhythmic pattern and apply to different aspects to come up with like really interesting kind of unexpected patterns. And again, you know, it's really easy to do the same pattern in 4, but let's say, you know, you want it to be the 3rd pattern in 5 again, just to kind of add that level of unpredictability. It doesn't always have to be even intervals of 4. You could just change it up so that it's kind of has a random feel but still is within the pattern as well. So this way you can take any audio recording, audio from that's coming from a synthesizer that maybe doesn't respond to velocity where we would do this, and apply that same pattern to other aspects. But you could just have your automation as a separate entity, which is why we used a volume plugin, so that if we have existing automation, we could still have like that track fade in and fade out over time. So if we come over here and just say I want that to fade in and out, so we'll say, okay, let's just go to our volume automation here, so we could have our volume increase on this part, but still have it increase in volume. So my overall volume of the track is increasing, but the volume plugin is attenuating and doing those jumps for us automatically. So using the step modulator is a great solution for being able to accomplish something like that. All right, let me see if we have more live questions. All right, looks like we may. All right. All right. All right. So we see, hi, checking in from Newport Beach, California. I have 5 plugins on a channel strip. How can I bypass 3 of them simultaneously? Okay. So let's say if you want to come over to our channel strip. All right, so let's say we have a compressor, de-esser, and magneto. Okay, so let's say I have this on the track. Let's do maybe a new modulator. Let's see if we could do this with maybe a macro knob. All right, so come over here. So say I want to turn off the compressor and de-esser and the magneto. All right, so let's see if we can. So we just try just one of the parameters here. All right, so let's see if we get it again. Trying to think, let's see if we can. Seems like each of them does it kind of automatically, but if we want to do it all, all right, so this doesn't seem to be. Let me just try one more time from scratch and see if maybe I'll just get rid of this mod and see if this modulator is affecting it at all. So let's just try the macro knob again. It's accepting it as a parameter. All right, so it's doing the first one here. Okay, so I think it can matter like what the state is. So now that this is so now we can have our macro knob that's automatically controlling the on off. So just check what the state is of the particular plugin, and if you want it to now just so let's say as we're playing this, and one of the cool things you can do with the macro knob is to just come over here and go MIDI remote, and I will say, okay, I want this to this knob. So I'm going to just come over here and say MIDI remote mapping. So I'm going to move this knob and apply the mapping. So now I move my MIDI remote, and that will automatically turn that on. So let's say if I automate this, I can just say, okay, let's, as we play, all right, so let's play back from the beginning and we'll see the automation. And that way we could have that one particular knob turn on and off multiple plugins, multiple parameters. So we could just take that. So again, just click on the plus sign with the macro knob. Make sure that they're all kind of in the same state. And then that will automatically be synchronized. And if you want to control this with the MIDI remote, we can now come right over here and say, okay, let's go for our MIDI remote, pick it up. And now once I move my MIDI remote knob, so this MIDI remote, I adjust this encoder. That encoder is triggering the modulator to turn on and off the different effects. And you can just click right here to automate that particular macro knob and just automate that, and that will play back in your project. So let me know if that makes sense and works for, and would be applicable for your workflow. And thanks for joining us from Newport Beach. It's a beautiful area. We used to always sneak down, get a NAMM dinner to get away from NAMM crowds when it was a much bigger show. Okay, so we see Bratman Studio says, hey Greg, I went to the inspector and I have very audio, but it doesn't have chords on my screen for a drop-down menu to turn off. Doesn't look as populated as your inspector. Okay, so let me just jump back to this project here. All right, so when we're doing this, realize that the inspector can change on if it's in kind of like the track mode or edit mode. So if I'm in edit mode, I don't see, like we come over here and I double click on the event, I may not see all of the same events as if, so like here I can see all these settings for my very audio, because this is kind of the inspector for the editor. But now when I click on the track itself, then we get different options. When I double click on the event, these are all the inspector options for the editor. Click here on the track. This becomes the active focus, and then you'll see the chord options show up for you right there. All right, so we see Beverly Beatty just says very cool for bass sounds for that step modulator. Thanks for sharing that configuration with the modulators. All right, so we see from Amado Solo, so sorry, I meant the channel inserts. So I think we could do the same thing for the channel inserts in that case. So let me just jump back to that project. Okay, so I'll go ahead and remove these here. All right, so let's go to inserts. All right, so let's say we have, so again, take our one knob, and we go to all right, so now we'll come over here. So we have one bank of 4, one bank of 1. So let's just see if we turn them on. We may have to turn them on first, so let me just see. Yep, so you can just come right over here. Same exact principle for using the macro knob to turn on and off different plugins. So let me know if that's helpful for you. And you could also trigger other components as well. So if you want 3 plugins out of 5 to turn on and off, or automate turning those plugins on during your chorus versus a verse. All right, wonderful to see Alex joining from the Grand Canyon in West Arizona. Thanks for being online with us today. All right, let me go to another question. All right, so question, is it possible to do retrospective recording on multiple tracks? Okay, so let's come over here. Let's say I have multiple tracks selected, and all right, now I think that's the greatest melody I've ever composed in my entire life, and Now I want to, but I wasn't in record. So what I could do now, if I want to apply this, so when we hit the normal retrospective record, it will go to the top track. But we had 3 tracks selected. So what I could do now is select this particular track. We will see insert our retrospective record. So I'm going to select the 3 tracks again here. So just to show it. So let's say all right, so now if I come over here, we could just choose to insert as a linear recording on that track. I go to this track. We could insert as a linear recording, select this track. So it's not all at once, but we can just simply have the retrospective record. So any of the tracks that were kind of had to record buffer, we can now that we're record enabled, you could just select them and come over and individually put on a retrospective record. I'll try just, I don't think we could do just a quick and do that across multiple tracks. I'll give it a try. So we'll say let's hold down maybe Alt and Option or Option plus Shift. Yeah, so you then come over here and just insert the recordings into the multiple tracks simultaneously. All right, next question. Is it possible to combine auto quantize with the retrospective recording? So the retrospective recording is always just kind of capturing it into a buffer, and it's not actually placing it, it's not placing it in a particular location. So it's kind of decoupled from where that is. So if I come over, let's say I do a retrospective record on this track. So my play position was there. So you're thinking, okay, maybe I'm playing along and we're at measure 1. I could move my play position here to anywhere, let's say in the middle. And then when I go to insert the retrospective recording, it's going to base it based upon the actual cursor position. So you're not going to be able to do an auto quantize on the input of the retrospective record because its placement is not determined yet. Because if you do a quantize and you shift the playback or the insertion point, or the point where the MIDI data is going to be inserted, it could be completely different. So that's why it's decoupled from the auto quantize. But if you wanted to quantize as soon as the event is inserted, then you could just hit Q. But currently it's kind of in a weird state where the notes are in order, they're around, but where they get placed is still not determined. So that's why you can't do a quantize, because it doesn't have a position yet. And that position is dynamic based upon where the cursor position is when the file. So it's not where the file was recorded to. It's based on where the cursor position is for that file. So there's no, it doesn't really make sense to have it quantized if you're do quantize on input if you're inserting it to a different location. All right, next question. Why can't I move signature track data together with the other MIDI notes or regions? Okay, so I think sometimes when we do this, let's say if I select my signature track in this event here, so let's say I come over and let me just select all right, so when I go to move this event, all right, so when we do this, and I think this is because we're moving kind of a container of events versus events. So let's do this, and we're going to select it. Select with a range tool. Okay. So I'm going to come over here. Let's just get our range perfectly aligned. All right. So we have this range selected. All right. So now that I have the range selected, I can just hold down, let's say, my Alt or Option key, and I can move the range of events, which includes both single events plus parts or events that contain information separately. So instead of using the selection tool, what we want to do is to just utilize the range tool, and then you could move the entire range, which would include the MIDI data as events with the time signature data. So try using the range tool for that. All right, let me see if there's more live questions. If not, we'll continue on. All right, so Soren is just back from watching his webinar on AI. Says about the AI licensing deal for Swedish people. AI is really a concern for me. I don't like that people prompt AIs have created music anyway. Okay. All right, so we see a question. How do I download cubes? So if you want to download Cubase, what you can do is purchase a license from a dealer, or purchase from the Steinberg website. So once you do this, we can say, let's go to, let's say, steinberg.net. All right, so once you're at the company website, you come over here to Cubase and say, okay, I want to buy Cubase. And then you could just purchase, there's 3 different levels of Cubase. There's a trial version. So once you're here, you can buy Cubase. You'll get a download access code, which will be a code that you would also download a program called the Steinberg Download Assistant. Once you have the Steinberg Download Assistant, the code you receive in the email after purchasing, after creating a My Steinberg account, then you would just simply redeem that code in the upper left-hand corner of the Steinberg Download Assistant. So once you're here, let's get this booted up. So you'll get a code in your My Steinberg account. You also will get it in an email. Click right over here to redeem your code, so you can copy, paste, and then you could download and install your product and activate the license right from there. Okay. All right, so let's get to our next question. Okay, so we see a lot of commands in Cubase could be done as a toggle instead of using 2 separate key commands. Like, for example, show hide automation. That's 2 separate commands. Why can't Steinberg apply this? Well, there's another way of doing this as well. So let's say, if we just come over here, there's a toggle. So if we go under project and you go to track folding, one of the things is you could say, we go to track folding. You could say, I want to show used automation. We could also come over here and hide the used automation. So let's say we go again, project to track folding. So we could hide. So we could do this now. So if I want to assign this to a keyboard shortcut, let's go to like the MIDI remote here. So I have this track selected. So once I have that track selected, I've assigned this function in the MIDI remote of, we'll see toggle selected track. So under folding, toggle selected track. So I'm going to come right over here Let's go to the key commands setting, not the preferences. Sorry, my error. Let's go to your key commands, and you'll see toggle selected track under folding. So just do folding, search for that, and then you could toggle selected track. So once I do that, I can now just come over here, and with one push of a key command or a button, my selected track, I can just open up. So let's say if I don't really have automation here, let me just automate some parameters. All right, so as I'm playing, I'm going to automate these parameters here. Let's adjust some EQ. All right, so now we've automated. So without having to do anything, I could select that track and all of my automation parameters show up right there. So same command to open and close. You don't have to use separate commands. Just use the toggle selected track under folding for that. All right, next question. Same goes for toggling automation lines in the piano roll window. In other programs, users could just toggle through the used commands data. In Cubase, each view has to be predetermined with a different key command. So I don't think so, but that's good. I think I set this up already. So let's say in my retro log part here, I have a number of different controllers. I'm going to look at this in our MIDI list editor. So you can see that we have modulation, we have other controllers, so expression, breath control, so a number of controllers. So the first thing you could do is actually just assign a key command. There is one that's for, let's say, show all used automation, so, or show used controllers. So generally it's termed a controller when you're in the MIDI editor and automation on the project window. So you go to your key commands, you can just come right over here and show used controllers. So right now I have no controllers defined here, and if I hit the button, I can now see all of my controllers. I don't have to hunt and peck through all of them. So all of my controllers that are visible here that are used in the project, we can just simply add those. Now if we want to show the controller lanes or hide the controller lanes with one mouse click, what you could do is just come over and we could choose to, at this point, I have this configured in my MIDI remote for this button. So, and this is just going to be show hide controller lanes. So that's also a MIDI keyboard shortcut that we could come over here. So let's say we go to the key commands, show hide controller lanes. So show hide controller lane. So it looks like it's Option L or Alt L as a default key command, I believe. So now when I'm in the MIDI, I can just come right over here. As I'm in my MIDI editor, I want to show all the used controllers. I want to hide or show those controllers. I could just hit that one single button to toggle back and forth. And to see all of my controllers, I don't have to kind of hunt and search for controllers. So, all right, let me jump back, see if we have more live questions coming in. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, so we see from Rick, Just says, okay, Greg, after resetting my preferences, it looks like I have to go back into the inspector and load all the features. Yeah, so if you come over here, you could just say go to setup sections in the inspector and make sure, but always be aware of the different inspector sections that could be available for the track versus the editor options as well. So, but glad it was an easy fix for you. All right, so we see Soul Sound Official just saying hi to everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're well. All right, I think we have one more question that was mailed in. All right, so we see, Greg, I don't know if you could tell what is causing the notes to be stuck in Hallian 7. The notes will move left and right, but not move either up nor down. This is not a problem with my older synth VSTs. It's something you can see from the JPEG. Yes, there's one thing that kind of stood out on the JPEG image that was sent along with this. So let's say if we have a quick chord track. Okay, so let's say I now take these chords and select this track. And let's just do create MIDI from the chords to MIDI. Okay, so now that I'm here, we may notice that some of the voices may be assigned. So sometimes when you look at like the voice, and let me just see if I split this. I'm going to go into my score editor, see if I can recreate what I saw in the picture. Okay. So let's come over here to the functions. Explode, we'll say to 4 new tracks. Okay, so here we're going to have this, and I think when we looked at it, let's see if the voice was indicated. I'll just go full screen. All right, so in this example, our voice was set to bass. So if I come over here, I can move the note like earlier or later, but it's kind of won't allow me to move it. So I think what we need to do is let's go back here to we want to select like that particular track, and what we want to do is, again, just like we were doing with Rick, say follow. You'll see a chords tab, and if you don't see that, click on setup sections, and you could just make sure that the chords are checked and visible, and then choose voicings to off. And now when I'm here, I can move it freely around, so it's not locked into the voice. So just make sure that you select you'll see the inspector change when you double click on the track, go to the chords and set the follow chord track to off, and see if that does the trick for you. I think that was from Beverly, if memory serves correct. All right. All right. See if we have more questions coming in. See Jazz Dudes posted some links for tutorials and user stories. All right. Let's see if there's more questions that come in. All right, so we see from Beverly, says, Greg, thank you for answering my questions today. I have to run right now. Bye to everyone until next Tuesday. All right, so we see from Alex, says a couple sessions ago, we discussed the possibility of generating an SATB coloring scheme automatically. When I select a voice in the color drop-down menu, my notes appear in gray. All right, so let's see if we could tackle that. I meant to spend some time on that, but we have some time here. All right, so let me just okay, so let's see if we could use the MIDI logical editor to assign the voices. So, all right, so let's see if we could select at first here. So we want to select a note, or we'll say our context variable is going to be equal to, let's say, note position in note number in chord. All right, so let's say we're going to do that as 0. All right, so we selected that. Okay, so if I come over here, all right, so it's selected all of the bottom voices here. So what we want to do now is choose to transform. And let's see if we could assign those to voice. Okay, so let's come over, let's switch our edit mode so we can see it bigger here. Let's say we're going to do our colors by voices. All right, let me just set all. Let's see if we could select all of these when we did that. All right, let me just put in other voices here. All right, so we have no color assignments here, so let's see if we could. So we'll take the lowest note in a chord, And see if we can assign it to voice 1. See if we could, if it's a different function besides the score. All right, so I just want to make sure I have this selecting the lowest voice in a chord. Okay, and if we set this to 1. All right, so we could select that, and now what we need to do is assign that to the voice. This is kind of what I was at. Let me just see if there's any presets that might have been done. Probably should have looked there first. Okay, so here we have so we want to select the particular notes. So we'll say our position in chord. Or note number in chord. Right, so we select that, and then we want to assign a voice. I'll try just a little more. If not, I'll definitely get it for over the weekend. Don't think it's going to be under note expression. Yeah, I'll definitely work on this over the weekend, Alex. Sorry about that. I meant to prepare it for last week after we talked about it. But I think I have your email, and I'll see if I get it. I'll send it over to you, and we'll show it on Tuesdays. Sorry about that. All right, so we see from Soul Sound Official, can you explain the gate plugin on a vocal and how much can I use the range for normal in-between syllable cuts and what's center in the sidechain and filter used for. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so let's say we want to put a gate. So we'll just open up our gate plugin under Dynamics. All right, so usually the default presets work pretty well. So let's just come over here.
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago. Parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach, ferry us home.
And I'll take off some of the...
You looked my way and your heart shone through. Caught my breath while you called me to. Well, even now I'm so in love with you. Just like a long, long time ago.
So let's say if I set the ratio too high. So we can hear singing coming in.
With long, long.
So that's probably a good case that we don't have the
Our first kiss, there was no regret.
so I think it defaults to minus
that
20.
Garth Brooks show.
And that can take out breaths.
And he called my mom, said you were too damn good for any boy.
So I
that
heard like
dumb.
one word kind of cut off there. So let's just decrease it.
His soured words are now dead and done. That was a long, long time ago. Now our two grown daughters
So
are
we're not getting the
married
typical
with
breaths
kids of their own.
The noise floor. So it's going to be kind of, the threshold can be just, it's going to be different. If it's a slow song, it may be a longer threshold than a song that's very fast rhythmically and with a faster tempo. So it's kind of case dependent upon the actual song as well. So just be concerned with that. Now, when you have kind of like your side chain, what you're able to do is, you could like feed in another track into a gate. So let's say you have maybe a rhythmic element. I'll just put this, we'll go back to that other project we were on just to show kind of the side chaining, because it could be a very creative effect. All right, so let's say we'll come over here and let's say we just have these chords that are playing. All right, so what a gate does is it kind of opens up. So let's say I have these chords. Now I may want those to be a little more rhythmically interesting. So let's say I find, let's look for maybe like a percussion loop. Find something that's here. We'll just try like the loop mash library. All right, so let's say I have this loop going on, and maybe I'm not even really using this particular loop like as a sound source. So let's say I want this loop to drive the sound of. So what I'm going to do is to put a gate on this particular track. So we'll come over here, let's put our sidechain, and we're going to sidechain the gate. Okay, so what I want to do is activate the sidechain, and so we will just say, okay, now we want our sidechain source to be the 12 drums. And this is where you could maybe adjust like the attack and release a little. And if we wanted to come back to this drum kit, I could go to my sends here, and we could so now if I wanted to just take this track and we route it to no boss. That way I could get kind of a rhythmic figure just from that particular drum set, and it's opening up and closing the gate based on the sound, the audio from the drums. So instead of that just being kind of and if you want that, you could also adjust the analysis of this. So that's what you could use kind of like the sidechain for, is kind of a creative effect to make something a little more interesting rhythmically in parts. All right, wonderful to see Graham Witcher joining us. All right, and we see Randy Lee Music joining. Hope you're doing well, Randy. All right, so we see from Soul Sound Official, is there a compounder? So let's say, so a lot of people, you may want to, let's say if we take the drums here on the guitar part, on the drums rather. So under dynamics, let's try squasher. So this way you could have different up down compression, and it's multi-band. So if you want to like slam dunk drums, so you could solo each band, but this is kind of doing upward and downward compression simultaneously. So, and if you wanted to listen to each of the bands, so you could just simply kind of come right over here and have that, and independent side chains for those as well. So if you're looking for a compounder plugin, I think sidechain would do the trick. All right. See, Graham has received 1 gallon of strawberry mango tango ice cream. All right, so we see from Geely CA, maybe Gerald Ely, says, using a sidechain on the gate to add rhythmic pulse. I like it. It says, and Soul Sound Official says, yeah, EDM for sure. All right, we'll see if there's more questions come in. Everyone's getting ready, probably in the northern hemisphere, enjoying summer weather. getting outside. All right, Soul Sound Official says need to deep dive into those, especially plus the multi-band series. Yeah, check out the multi-band envelope shaper. That's also really special. All right, so we have Michael Graybill joining from a rainy Dallas. Yeah, I saw footage of weather in Dallas. It looked pretty wet. He says, as a ginger kid growing up in Texas, I lived for the relief of a cloudy, rainy day. Still cheers me up. Pretty sure I write better, too. So, yeah, glad that you're surviving the storm. It looked pretty bad, what I saw on the news. All right, we'll see if there's more questions that sneak in. Hope that everyone has learned a couple of tips and tricks. Gotten some questions answered, learned some new workflows. And if you have, make sure you hit the like button. All right. We'll give it our minute or so if we get more questions. If not, we can wrap up a little early. I'll make my index go a little faster tonight. Now I'll probably get 20 questions in a row. All right, so John Barry Views just says, always learn something new. Always learn something here. So that's great. All right, I'll give it another 30 seconds or so, see if there's any more questions. If not, we'll wrap up. Hope that all the fathers are going to have a great Father's Day for the countries that are celebrating it this weekend. So, all right, Bratman Studios is having a great time making harmonies with Warp. All right, Michael Team says, I always learn how much I don't know. I feel that way with Cubase myself, so don't feel bad. But as long as you learn a new tip or trick, we're all, that's what you can do. Just keep learning new stuff all the time. Better workflows. All right, so with that, looks like we are out of questions. Thanks, everyone. I want everyone to have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on Tuesday and Friday next week, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. We'll go for up to 4 hours or until we run out of questions. You could always send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. I'll try to get the Project Logical Editor preset, see if I can figure out how to do the voices for Alex. But with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe and healthy. And we'll be back on Tuesday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Take care and goodbye.